Hi guys, so welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a temperature converter using JavaScript. So this is the finished version of the code. So you can see we have Celsius, we have Fahrenheit, and we have Kelvin. So if I want to convert 100 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit to Kelvin, so these values are changed automatically. So you can see now 100 Celsius is equivalent to 212 Fahrenheit and 373 Kelvin. So if I increase, I can also change here to 300. Then we get the corresponding values of the Celsius and the Kelvin, and we can still do the same to the Kelvin. And then it updates automatically to the Celsius and to the Fahrenheit. So this is the repository that will be linked into the description. So we do have two branches here. So we do have the master branch and the initial branch. So our focus is on the initial branch so that you can follow along, but in case you want the full code, it's available in the master branch. So let's get started. So we are going to clone the initial branch. Alternatively, you could clone the master branch and switch to the initial branch. So that's what I'm going to do. So go to your terminal and then copy the code that you want to use. So you could use the SSH or use the HTTPS. So this is just your personal preference or what you are using. So I'm going to use the SSH. Then go back to my terminal, navigate to the folder you want to clone, and then do git clone. And then we clone that repository. Alright, so it is cloned. You can cd into the repository and then open this in VS Code. So it has just opened in VS Code. And then I'm going to close this and then open VS Code. And then let me take you through the code. So what it is doing. So the first thing we do have is the license. So this, you don't have to mess around with the license. And then in the index.html, this is our HTML code. So as you can see, we have the heading and then the three fields. So you have the three input fields. So you have the Celsius input, the Fahrenheit input, and we do have the Kelvin input. And then we do have the attribute to attribution. So to view this in the browser, you can use this extension called live server. So you can use this extension called live server. So to get the extension, go to the extension tabs and search live server. And then after searching live server, you'll see it. So install this extension, navigate to the HTML you want to serve into the browser, and then click the go live here on the bottom. So if you click the go live, then your website will run here. So as you can see, everything is still working because I'm cloned into the master branch. So if I switch to the initial branch so that we can start from there, so we can say git switch and then switch to the initial branch. So if I go back and then start typing, nothing is happening to the Fahrenheit and nothing is getting converted into the Kelvin. So what logic are we going to use? So as you can see, you can see this is the attribution text. So these are the three input fields that we do have. And this is the heading and the background image. So let me just show you that. So we do have, this is the heading. So this is the heading. This is the D with the ID of card. We do have a link to the CSS files. So these lie in the assets. We have styles, script, and the images. So this is the background image. And then the three inputs, each input is enclosed with a div with a class of field. So we do have the label of Celsius, the ID of Celsius in the input, the ID of Fahrenheit in the Fahrenheit input, and the ID of Kelvin in the input of Kelvin. And then we do have the attribution to the person who owns the background image. The background image is here. We do have the script, which is empty in the initial branch. And then in the styles, we do have the styles for the HTML template. So this is it. So our main focus is on JavaScript, and then we need to understand this JavaScript is linked to the HTML here at the bottom, so that the JavaScript will only load when all the HTML has already loaded. So what strategy are we going to use here? So we want, when someone enters something in either of the inputs, then all the other inputs are filled with the converted value, and then we could also go to the other inputs and then fill in a detail, and then the corresponding other inputs will get updated immediately. So what can we do? So the very first thing you need to do in JavaScript is that you need to gain access to what you are working with, because you need to get access to all these three inputs. And then we are going to create an event listener to each input, an on change event, such that whenever the value changes, like we are typing right now, then that value is fed to a conversion chain which converts the values and updates the other inputs. So our very first step is to grab these inputs. How do we do that? So how do we do that? So the first thing we need to do is that, let me open this side by side. So let me open the HTML. So let me open, I don't know whether it will be here, but it's okay. So let me just make this one smaller. We have said the first thing we need to do is to gain access to these inputs. How do you gain an access to a HTML element from JavaScript? So this is what you do. So let me make this one smaller so that we can have typing room. To get access to an element in the DOM, we do have very many ways, because the DOM gives us many ways to use. We could use the ID, we could use the tag, and then we could also use the class name. Now the class. So if you give this a class, we can access it using the class itself. And then we could get it using the tag itself and all that. But what I'm going to use is a very common way of accessing DOM elements, is the get element by ID. So what I can say is the const Celsius input is equals to document. So document is the whole document which has methods for us to access elements in the DOM. So we have a method called get element by ID. So which element do you want to get by its ID? You want the Celsius element. So we come here and write Celsius, right? So we have our first input. So we can duplicate this one 3 times because we do have 3 inputs. And then we grab the second input, which is the Fahrenheit. So we can copy the Fahrenheit, paste it there, and then change this one from Celsius input to Fahrenheit, like that. And then finally we can take the Kelvin input. So we can take the Kelvin input and add it there as the Kelvin input. So basically we just got access to these inputs, and we have not yet done anything. We just got an access to the elements, and getting access to the elements will help us achieve absolutely nothing. So we need to do the next thing, which is we need to add an event listener to each of these inputs, and then we pass it to some sort of a function to process the data. So what we said is that if I enter 100 here, this 100 should be grabbed as I am typing. So that's an event of whenever we on change event, whenever the Celsius input value changes, even with 1 character, and then we convert the Celsius to Fahrenheit and to Kelvin, and we update the other inputs. All right. So the next thing we need to do is to add event listener. So if you say Celsius input dot add event listener, so the event we want to target is we have so many events. We can target the on change, the change, But here you need to ask yourselves, how do you want to work with this? Because we don't have a button to evaluate, like if you write Celsius, we don't have a button where you say calculate. We could also do whenever someone is finished, then they press enter and then you calculate. But in our scenario, we want to get to calculate whenever any input changes. So that event is called input, right? So that event is called input. So let me just show you. So, and then whenever that event is captured, this is what we want to run. So let me show you. So console.log, I could console.log the Celsius input dot value. All right. And then if I inspect this, I need to inspect. So if I inspect this and click on the console, so if I type, you can see in every key type, we get a new value. So if I come here and change this one to maybe change event, so this one works whenever when you blur. So you can see it's not showing. As soon as I get out of the input, it runs. So that's the difference. So we are going to use the input, and then we are going to create a function that will process this. So we can call process data, which receives a value and a type, because we don't want to create each function for the event listeners. We want all those 3 event listeners to use each the same function. So we need a value. This is the value coming from the input. And then we need a type. So this type will tell the input what input or what value, what input is associated with this value. So what we can do here is that we can call the process data function, and then we give it the value. The value is always found from the input dot value. So we have the Celsius input dot value. All right. So since we have the Celsius input dot value, this is the actual value from the input, and then our process data waits for it, and then we give it a type so that we can know what are we working with. We are working with the Celsius. All right. And then we can duplicate this event listener 3 times, and then we can go ahead and say Fahrenheit input dot add event listener. Then here we call the Fahrenheit input, and then we say, all right. And then finally we can say the Kelvin input, and then here we can say Kelvin input dot value, and then we say we are working with the Kelvin. So let me show you. Let me console log. So we can console.log. Then we can say value, and then we have the value, and then console.log type. So console log the type, and then okay. So we do have that. So let me recap again. So we added event listeners to each input whenever there is a change event. So whenever the input value changes, we fire off this function. So we fire off this function, and then when we fire this function, we pass into the function the value from the input, and then we pass in the type. So what are we working with? So if I go back to my browser and I say 100, we can see we do have one. Initially we typed 1, it shows us the value is 1 and this type is Celsius. 10 type is Celsius. So if I come here and type Fahrenheit, we can see the value is 4 and we are working with the Fahrenheit. And 9, I can see the value is 9 and we're working the Kelvin. So that's the next step. And then the final step for us to work with is that we need to start converting these elements. So the next process will be, we have the value and what we want to convert it to. All right. So the next thing we need to do is that, let's assume we have the input value is 100 and the type is Celsius. So we need to convert this Celsius into Kelvin and into Fahrenheit. So to make this one easier, we will start by creating utility functions. So these are functions that will help us do the conversion. So to Fahrenheit, so whenever you want to, this function will be used to convert, a Kelvin or a Celsius to Fahrenheit. All right. So this function is basically used to convert the values given to Fahrenheit. But since we have only two types that can be converted to Fahrenheit, we create such a utility function. So what we can do here is, this function's job, let me just type here. So its job is just to convert the given value to Fahrenheit. Okay. So this is its own job that it is working for. So the first thing we need to do is that we need to create an empty variable. So we can call it far, we can call it any type, and then we're using an if else statement. So the first thing you need to know is that if the type is equals to Kelvin, so let's not first add anything, and then it can say else if the type is equals to Celsius, and then else we can say alert valid type, then we return, and then here return the converted value. So this one will hold our converted value that will be either be converted inside here. All right. So why did I use an else, and also I added a return into the else? So the reason I did this is to prevent any more execution. So maybe later on in the video or later on in the project, you could start adding more code here. So if you don't do this early return, then this code will be executed and it's not what you might not want. So let's recap what we are doing. So this function's whole job is to convert the values it's given to Fahrenheit. All right. In our temperature converter, we do have only three types. We have the Fahrenheit, the Kelvin, and the Celsius. So this utility function to Fahrenheit, its own job is to convert values into Fahrenheit. So the first value is Fahrenheit. We cannot use it to convert a Fahrenheit to a Fahrenheit. Okay. So that's not the ideal use. So the next deal would be, we want to convert a Kelvin into Fahrenheit. The next deal would be, we want to convert a Celsius into Fahrenheit. So the next thing we need to ask ourselves is that how many Kelvin, or what is the formula used to convert a Kelvin into a Fahrenheit? So to do that, we can use Google. So we could say, so Kelvin to Fahrenheit. We can go to Google, and Google will essentially give us the formula. So to convert a Kelvin into a Fahrenheit, we go into Google and we grab this formula. We go back. So if we do, until this point, we have the Fahrenheit. So we can say Fahrenheit, the already created variable, we can now assign it a value, and we can say is equals to, I can paste this. I'm going to remove this. So this is the formula. Here we pass in the kelvins. So any value from the inputs is always a string. So we need first to convert this value into a number. So we can say number value, and then we need to subtract 273 0.15, and then we multiply by 9/5, so we can add square brackets here, I think, like that. So this is the formula to convert a Kelvin to Fahrenheit, and then we also need a formula to convert Celsius into Fahrenheit. So we can do Celsius into Fahrenheit. We can add at least 1 degree, and then this is the formula. So come and grab this formula, and then we go back and paste it. So we take the value as a number, and then we multiply by 9/5, right? So we multiply by 9/5. You can say multiply by 9/5. You can see where I got the formula. It's quite simple. And then we can reassign Fahrenheit into that value. So what does this do? We said it receives in a value that should be converted to Fahrenheit, and the type we are converting from, so that we can, because we don't want to repeat this function. Otherwise we could have created two functions like Kelvin to Fahrenheit and another function Celsius to Fahrenheit, but we use this function to do the same thing. So the next thing we need to do is to create two more utility functions to help us convert the others. So I'll just create them. So we can create another function, then to Kelvin, or we can start with the to Celsius. It still receives the value that should be converted and the type. All right, and then we can say Celsius. Let's say cells, we can call it like that. We can create an empty variable. Okay, not an empty, but find undeclared. You can say it's still declared. Let's see in the browser. So if I go here and say type, now let's say let age, then you can say, so let age console.log type of age. So it's undefined. So if you create a variable and don't give it a name, or don't give it a value, it's undefined. So we'll still do the same thing we have done here into the to Fahrenheit, whereby we do some if statements checks. So we can say if the type is equals to Kelvin, so we are converting Kelvin to Celsius. So we could do, let's first leave it, then you can say else if the type is far, then you can leave it, and then else, then we can alert the valid type, and then you can return, and then finally cells. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves, how do we convert a Kelvin to a Celsius? We go back to the browser. Google will help us with this. So we can say Kelvin to Celsius. So you do have the formula. The formula is the number of Kelvin you want to convert minus 273.15. All right. So you come and take that formula and put it here. So we can say cells now is equals to a number of the value. So you have to convert it into a number because the value is from the inputs to, then we minus 273.15. The next one is how to convert Fahrenheit into Celsius. So we come here, then this is the formula we are looking for. We go back to our function, and then we assign a value of, so what we could do here is that the number of, we convert the value into a number and then subtract that 2 then we subtract that 2, and then we multiply by 5/9. So that's the formula. And then finally, we create one for the Kelvin. So these are simply utility functions. So function to Kelvin, and then we say value and then the type. And then we can say let Kelvin. And then we check now if the type is Celsius. And then we continue and check if the type is equals to so the reason I did not, we do have only two options. So the reason I did not do if type is Celsius and then I stopped is because this function can be used. Maybe you have other conversions. So maybe you have more. So you have to be very explicit, because if you do have more, you'll just come and add them here and then say else if instead of, and then this code is readable because this function is self-explanatory what it is doing. So if I do else alert, so I can say invalid type, and then we can return, and we return Kelvin. So this is self-explanatory. So why? Because we do the checks. You can see if the type is Celsius, if the type is Fahrenheit, do this. If not, return an error. Because we do have two options, I had an option of omitting this one and infer that the else will always be Fahrenheit, but this breaks when we add more values. So that's why I need to be explicit. So the next thing we need to check is how to convert Celsius into Kelvin. Go back to Google. We can say Celsius to Kelvin, we just add 273.15. So again, you convert the number into the value into a number, because any value from the input is a string, and we don't want to do string subtractions and calculations. It will always be buggy. So we do number value to convert it into a value, and then we add 273.15. And then we can say now Kelvin holds this value. Then the next one is how to convert Fahrenheit to Kelvin. Fahrenheit to Kelvin, and then you grab that formula. So this formula, you copy, go back, and then this one lies to the here, and then now we can do. So this one you can do. So let me just see. Yeah. So this one you can do number value, and then we subtract that 2, then you multiply by 5/9, and then we add that. So that was a lot of work, but we are almost done. So we have created utility functions to help us deal with conversions. So we can even collapse all these. We don't need them anymore. And then we come back to our process data. So our process data receives in a value and a type. So it already knows what it is dealing with. So the first thing we'll do is that we want to check if there is no value. So why do we need to do this? It's because when someone's, so let me just go back to the browser. So when someone writes 100 and then he deletes all the values, at the end, the input will be an empty string, and the number conversion will fail in this converter. So you can see we do have number conversions, but an empty string cannot be converted into a number. So what we can do is we do some checks. So if we check if there is no value, this person has deleted everything. So we need to, because we are doing conversions, so like I showed you, is that if I add 100, all these were being filled with data. But if we subtract all the way, there's no way we can convert an empty string into a number. So these two will always hold values. So we need to delete these ones too. right? So what we do is that we check if there's no value, and then we do some checks, and then we say if the type we are dealing with is Celsius, and then we can say, so if we are dealing with the Celsius, so the Celsius has been subtracted to 0, then we need to, let me go back. So if we have deleted the Celsius to 0, then we need to delete the values of the Fahrenheit and for the Kelvin. All right. And vice versa. So what we can do is that the Kelvin input dot value, then we say is an empty string. Then the Fahrenheit input dot value is equals to an empty string. And then we do the same. So if the input is Kelvin, we have deleted Kelvin all the way like this. We have deleted all the way. We need to reset the values of the Celsius and the Fahrenheit. All right. Then we can say else if type is equals to Kelvin, then we need to reset the values for the Celsius dot value is equals to an empty string, and then for the Fahrenheit as well, dot value is equals to an empty string. And then finally you can say else if type is equals to Fahrenheit, and then if it's the Fahrenheit, we need to reset the Celsius. So we can say Celsius input dot value. So Celsius input dot value is equals to an empty string, and then we reset for the Kelvin. So you can say Kelvin input dot value is equals to an empty string. Otherwise, we return. If it doesn't match, we just return. We don't continue with the data processing. And then finally, so this is just for validation. And then finally, we have the value and we do have the type. So the next thing we need to do is that we need to do some either an if statement or a switch, which will check what value has been added, and then it pre-populates the converted values to the other fields. So in this, I'll just use a switch statement. So, and then I'll switch based on the type. We do have 3 types: Celsius, Kelvin, and Fahrenheit. But since this is not TypeScript, you cannot type out these. But just mind you, this is exactly what it is. So the type, we do have the Celsius, do have the Kelvin, and then do have the, so bear in mind that. So we are switching again. So you want to see what is the user type, which field is the user typing in, so that we can convert that value into the other inputs. So that's exactly what we're doing. So we start with the first case we will start with is the Celsius. So if the user is currently typing in the Celsius, we need to take that value, convert it into the others, which is the Fahrenheit and the Kelvin, and refill the inputs. So we can do this. If the case is that, then we can grab the Fahrenheit value of it, which is equals to the Fahrenheit is equals to, we do have the value we want to convert to Fahrenheit. We already created a utility function, so it's just a matter of calling it and then providing it the type we want to convert it to. So I can say to Fahrenheit, passing it the value. So this time we'll convert the value into a number. We already have validations on top, so we can say the value, and then you give that the type, because the type will still match. So this one can either be a Kelvin and a Fahrenheit. So this type, even though we are in the case statement, we could also do like that. But still, when we get into the case, the type is always the Celsius. So we can basically use the type so that we can do copy pasting for the other fields. So we can say that. So we do have the Fahrenheit value, and then we need to convert it into Kelvin, because we have 3 form. So if the user is currently typing on the Celsius, we need to convert it into Fahrenheit and into Kelvin. So we do that Kelvin is equals to Kelvin. We already created that function, and this function cares about the value we want to convert and then tell it from who we are converting, either from the Celsius or the Fahrenheit. So to Kelvin, and then we say the number value. I think I could have created this here on top. Now that I'm thinking of it, I'm just doing too much, but let's keep it at that, and then we pass it the type. Finally, we update the other inputs with the converted value. So we can say Fahrenheit input dot value is equals to Fahrenheit. Kelvin input dot value is equals to Kelvin. And then we break out of that case, because if you don't break it, it will continue with other cases. And now you are ready to test this. So this is my function. If I try now start typing, you can see now we have the values of the Kelvin and the values of the Celsius. So we have 100 degrees Celsius. So Celsius to Fahrenheit. So let me try that. So Celsius into Fahrenheit, let's see. 100 degrees Celsius, it's 212 Fahrenheit, which is working. So, but now if I type in the Fahrenheit, we have not yet implemented that case because we just matched the Celsius case. So what I can do is to duplicate these 2 more times. So 1, 2. Right, and then this is the second one. We can check for the Kelvin, and then for the Kelvin we can still grab the Fahrenheit value, but now we need to convert the Celsius. So you can say Celsius, and then you can do to Celsius, and then here we can say Celsius input dot value is equals to our newly created Celsius, and that's it. And then we go to the last one, which is the Fahrenheit, and then we cannot convert a Fahrenheit to a Fahrenheit, so we need to convert it into, now so we have the Fahrenheit, we need to convert this Fahrenheit into Celsius. So what we do is that we say let cells, we can say cells is equals to Celsius number value, and then you give it the type, and then the Celsius input dot value is equals to cells. So yeah, so Kelvin. All right, and then let's go and test 100, and then I can say this one is 221, or you can see now everything, but the Kelvin is not working. So let's go back and see. So the case of the Kelvin, so if we process the Kelvin input, so let me see what here the issue is. So this one is working. So if I say 212, the Kelvin is not getting updated when we type in the Fahrenheit. So if we go to the Fahrenheit, so the case, so we added an event listener. So to the Kelvin input, and then we gave it the value. Now the problem is that if I type in the Fahrenheit, the Kelvin is not getting updated. So we go to the Fahrenheit input, then it matches the case of the Fahrenheit, and then so we say Kelvin input, Now Kelvin, let Kelvin variable is equals to Kelvin, the number and the type. So I think the issue might be to the Kelvin. The type is Fahrenheit. So let me see. There's, I think, Fahrenheit. So let's copy this. Okay, Kelvin input. So to Kelvin, and then we match in there. So let's, I think we have an issue with, I don't know whether that was the issue. Oh, we did not. That's how you debug. So I failed to reassign the value, so that's why it was not working. But now if I say 10, you can see it's working. If I come here and say 212, and then here 115, it's working. So, and that's it, guys. That's how you create a temperature converter using JavaScript. So make sure you follow along for more tips, subscribe and share with your friends. So